teacher, now I'm here to beat you with full force, mess up your facial features. Hasta la vista, I'm selling all your little Caesars.
Shredder's Revenge is a great tribute to everyone's favorite Turtles. It's clear this game was made with love and a deep passion for the brand. Now, I'm not overly familiar with this series or the beat-em-up genre, but I'm versed enough to catch some of the references, and I recognize many of the villains. This ranking is primarily based off the overall fun I had during the fights, whether it be the challenge, the build-up, or the variety in attacks. Because there are so many bosses in the game, I decided to just choose my top 10. So without further ado, let's jump into the video. Tempestra barely squeaked into this ranking, but she managed to put up a fairly challenging fight that kept me engaged. She doesn't really do much herself, as she only has one attack that's easy to dodge. The challenge comes from her summoning the digitized versions of Taka and Razar, who are easy to take on their own, but once you put them together, they manage to put up a fight. I would save up one of my special attacks when fighting them, and use it on her when she's vulnerable. Overall, it's not a bad fight, but could have been a bit more challenging. This fight was a great change of pace after the first two levels. I struggled to identify their attack patterns, which did result me in dying a few times. It took some effort to understand when the truck would begin its back and forth movement, and it also took me a bit to consistently dodge Rocksteady's bombs. Bebop's attacks also require you to pay close attention to detail, as there is a very small window of time for you to react. This was one of the most challenging fights to me, but it also could have been because I was still getting used to the controls. But what got it at number 9 on my ranking is the challenge and the change of pace that it brought. Leatherhead spends his time jumping out of the sewers to surprise attack you. Only, it's pretty easy to dodge and allows you to get a few hits in as well. I found this fight to be fairly easy, however it managed to be very fun. And I think the fun comes from his unique attack pattern with the sewers, as he's also easy to dodge when he comes at you directly. I believe he's number 8 for me due to the sewer jumping and his design. I can't explain it, but I had some fun with this one despite the lack of challenge. The Rat King definitely lives up to his name, as you'll spend your time during this fight jumping over hordes of rats. He proved himself to be powerful when up close as well, as if he gets a hold of you, you can be sure you'll lose a good chunk of health. Although I didn't find him to be too hard to evade, the real difficulty comes from the jumping rats. Whenever these would get a hold of me, I would panic and start clicking random buttons, which usually resulted in me taking even more damage. I enjoyed the use of rats in this fight. It definitely upped the difficulty, and I also found them to be a unique addition to his attack pattern. Overall, the challenge and his use of the rats is what got the Rat King on this ranking. I'm sure many of you may have expected this to be at least in the top 3. I definitely enjoyed this fight, but I didn't find his attack patterns to be too difficult to read. And after a certain amount of time, he would become defenseless, where you can use your special abilities to drain his health. He also didn't add too many more moves as the fight progressed, so for a final boss, I actually found it to be somewhat disappointing with the difficulty. On the positive side though, I enjoyed the music, and regardless of challenge, I had a great time avoiding his consistent pursuit of me. Similar to the Tenderizer, this boss felt fresh. Wingnut utilized missiles and dashing as his methods of attack. I enjoyed jumping over the projectiles, but I wasn't really sure when I would or wouldn't be able to jump them. The perspective was a bit hard to read, so you just have to make it work. But once you get the timing down, the fight becomes much easier. The difficulty really comes in when the flying enemies attack you as you're trying to evade his dash attacks. Similar to the Rat King, I would panic and just start clicking random buttons. But if you stay composed throughout the fight and get your timing right, you won't find too much trouble here. Metalhead gave me some trouble, largely due to me not realizing that I could hit his faulty missiles back at him to breach his invincibility. This fight would have been dull if that was the only way you could defeat him, but I found his attacks challenging to read at times. And if you get too comfortable when close, he'll do this lunging kick that seemed to get me almost every time. And enemies also appeared throughout the fight, making it difficult to stay composed, which resulted in me making more mistakes than I wanted. I enjoyed this fight because something was always happening, whether it be the missiles, the enemies, or dodging the flying lunge kicks. This one surprised me. I was worried I would really struggle to get hits on him. Turned out to be not as difficult to do as I thought, but what you don't want to do is get hit by his lasers, as they do a ton of damage. Similar to Metalhead and Wingnut, things get more challenging when you throw enemies into the fray, as you have to jump these lasers. His own attacks aren't too much of a threat, as they are easy to evade, but if you become careless when trying to land a hit, he most certainly will catch you off guard. Overall, this was a fun fight that kept me engaged the entire time. This was probably the most difficult boss in the game for me. It could be related to the fact that this level was also the hardest in the game, but I really struggled avoiding his off-screen punches while fighting enemies. There was always a lot going on, so it required me to multitask throughout the battle. It also doesn't help that his attacks do a significant amount of damage as well. You really need to take advantage of the small window that you have to attack, because as the fight progresses, it just gets harder and harder. In most of the boss fights, there's usually a short period to build up a special ability, but I struggled to ever get that in this one. Defeating Chrome Dome was probably the most satisfying experience I had with the game. This may not come as a surprise to a lot of you, but I couldn't give the #1 spot to anyone but Shredder. After defeating Krang, I was a little underwhelmed with how easy he was. Then once Shredder showed up, I understood why it was such a lack of challenge. The fight begins with an amazing soundtrack that sets the tone, and Shredder will immediately blitz you. I learned that you do not want to get caught up in one of his combos, so it's good to keep your distance when you can. Most of the other bosses' attacks will just knock you back, but Shredder will piece you up and it can become very frustrating at times. I ended up barely beating him by charging up my abilities whenever I had the chance, and then I would just spam it. It might not be the most clean way to do it, but I got it done. Maybe I have some Shredder bias, but between the music, the build-up, the challenge, and his combos, I think Shredder is the best boss in the game. I mean, it's even named after him. Shredder's revenge kept me engaged throughout the entirety of the game, and provided a surplus amount of boss fights that proved to be challenging. I believe my one wish would be that each boss had their own theme to separate each one of them further, but no complaints here. This game was a great experience. Besides just my opinion, let me hear who your favorite boss was in the comments below. Also, please leave a like and subscribe, as I will continue to post videos as quickly as possible. So until next time, peace out.